Welcome back to The Word in the Works, TWTW. I'm Pastor Ben Meyer. My co host is Pastor Jason Goodham. And in chapter 8, we learn the truth about Justine. She has been accused of murder, she's been framed for murder. She is not the murderer. And she, though falsely accused, remains calm, while Victor, who's truly guilty, cowers in fear. So the chapter really just expounds upon these basic things. There's not an awful lot more to the chapter in the broad sense. It's a whole lot of storytelling that shows those main themes, I think. So where do you want to start with this today?
Well, the point to start is really Victor and Elizabeth go to visit Justine,
Right.
right?
Right.
And to figure out, because Elizabeth thinks that Justine might be guilty. Elizabeth thinks that there is some character fault in herself that caused her to oversee this wickedness in Justine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is almost chapter 8's almost an indulgent chapter, because what we do is we get another layer to Frankenstein's cowardice. It doesn't really advance the narrative forward. It just heaps more burning coals on Victor's head for what he does or doesn't do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So they go and visit, and initially Elizabeth is, you know, why did you do this? Did you do this?
Yeah.
And Victor knows, of course, she didn't do it, but he's not real helpful. And um, she, Justine, um, has quite the exchange with Elizabeth, doesn't she?
Yeah.
She, tell us about that.
Well, she relays the tale of everything that, the first scene of the chapter is the trial and Justine's testimony, and then Victor and Elizabeth turn to her, and after the uh, explanation, Elizabeth, there's this two tiny paragraph exchange between the two of them while they're visiting her in the cell. And Elizabeth exclaims, "Oh, Justine, why did you rob me of my last consolation? I relied on your innocence, and although I was then very wretched, I was not so miserable as I am now." And Justine responds, "And do you also believe that I am so very, very wicked? Do you also join with my enemies to crush me, to condemn me as a murderer?" Her voice was suffocated with sobs.
Yeah.
And her condemnation is at the hand of her enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Justine doesn't know who her enemies are, but she outs Victor in his behavior and in his cowardice as her enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And why does she confess to us a crime she has not committed?
Well, I'm trying to find it. My eyes aren't finding it in the page, but
Yeah. Well, I got it. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed that I might obtain absolution.
yep.
So she's more concerned with being right before the Lord than she is with being justified in the eyes of men. And she would rather other people think her a murderer and be right, before God, than be right before man and guilty before God, which is
Mm-hmm.
the opposite of Frankenstein, who cannot bring himself to be um, to be looked at, in any lower way by other people, but has no regard for God.
Yeah, and again, here Justine ends up the polar opposite, because we learned a little bit ago that she conceives of herself as cursed
Hmm.
with their family situation. And so she finds opportunity to gain peace with God through the absolution. And she kind of almost fatalistically resigns herself to her fate with the trial. And Victor sits entirely tormented as he hears Justine be a better person than he is.
Yeah, yeah. And she says, "I do not fear to die." That pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. I leave a
Yeah.
sad and bitter world, and if you remember me and think of me as of one unjustly condemned, I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Learn from me, dear lady, to submit to patience, in patience to the will of heaven.
Yeah.
And she does. Victor will not.
Yeah, he will not submit, and instead he sits tortured and tormented to the point where Elizabeth has to apologize for him.
Hmm.
And this is, I think that one of the key points of the chapter. Uh, uh, Justine wonders if Victor thinks he's guilty because he hasn't said anything, right? And Elizabeth interjects for Victor in his cowardice and says, "No, Justine," said Elizabeth, "he is more convinced of your innocence than I was. For even when he heard that you had confessed, he did not credit it." And
Hmm.
again, Victor's cowardice, he keeps getting more and more guilty because people keep crediting him with the best.
Yeah. They see the best in him instead of understanding, the actual truth of the situation. Yeah. So goodness, the last line in this
Oh,
chapter is just fantastic. Thus spoke my prophetic soul, as torn by remorse, horror, and despair. I beheld those I loved spend vain sorrow upon the graves of William and Justine, the first hapless victims to my unhallowed arts.
huh.
So,
Could you write
goodness,
a better sentence?
I couldn't. I know that. Man.
That's remarkable.
Uh, and very much furthering the story to the next chapter.
Yep.
Yeah. So now we're going to go to the next section, and we're going to find out how all of this continues to unfold.
Yeah, unfold, or even really more appropriately, unwind.
Mm,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's this is the unraveling of Frankenstein more than, his nervous breakdown after creating the creature and everything. Is
Hmm.
Victor is getting some, like we talked off air, you compared Victor to Judas,
Hmm.
that he feels the brunt of his guilt, but he still can't repent.
Yeah.
And Victor in section 2, in part 2 of the book, becomes much more introspective and aware of the consequences of his actions, and still won't repent.
Hmm.
He is bound and determined to make it right in some weird way, shape, or form.
Well, it's
But
self justification. He wants to fix it himself.
yep.
Yeah.
And so this is layer 2. The part 1 is Victor trying to improve upon creation. Part 2 is Victor trying to improve upon redemption, and he does
Yeah.
neither.
And I think one of the points that we can take away from this pastorally is what happens with sin. It destroys, it destroys, it destroys, it destroys. And the more you try to manage it, the more destructive it gets. The only solution is confession. The only solution is to take it to the Lord, and He deals with it. And um, when we see Justine do that, she finds peace.
No,
He will not
it's
do this.
at the end of Genesis chapter 4, God's words to Cain: "Sin is
Hmm.
crouching at your door, its desires for you, but you must master it," right?
Hmm.
And that the whole thing with that prophetic word, "Your sin will find you out," describes Victor's narrative in this book in his unrepentance.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this chapter you want to share?
I
Or
think
any
it's a
other
good
thoughts?
stopping point for
All
us. We
right.
don't, we don't want to get lost in the weeds. There's plenty of depth to be mined, and that's up to the reader to do. But hitting those high points and
Yeah.
maintaining those theological themes are just crucial.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. Well, we'll stop there for today, and we hope you'll join us again next time for the Word and the Works. He gone.